Our next speaker is Ahmed from Donder Institute of Brain Cognition and Behavior. I believe he's in Amsterdam.
Nijmegen.
Nijmegen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, he's going to tell us how to use Julia to do neurodynamics.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. So yeah, what I want to tell you is more about this Julia package that we're building or actually releasing. But I want to try to a bit more to motivate why did we want to build this and what's the research question that we're trying to answer in the first place. So basically, I think if you attended the previous talk, I think the main problem is that we have no idea how the brain works. We kind of know, at least on a biophysical level, how a single neuron works, and we can explain why do we see these kind of observations, when does a neuron fire and when it does not, but we don't really know how does this translate to what we observe, to our daily behavior. It's not like we have some statistical framework to take us from micro observation to macro observation, like in statistical physics or something. But in recent years, there has been a lot of success, or getting a bit closer in trying to recognize the brain as a dynamical system, and mostly looking at not just single neurons, but multiple neurons. Now with advancement in neuroimaging, we can look at multiple neurons at the same time, and we can do these kind of cognitive experiments and try to use this dynamical system approach to model what is happening in the brain. So what people actually do is that they try to model the brain or try to replace what the brain is doing by using some models. And in this case, if we're interested in something that's a bit high dimensional, if we're looking at images or audio and more complex behavior, people usually look at deep recurrent neural networks, which is sequential models. They can basically approximate any kind of dynamical system. And they train them, so they give them these kind of stimulus that you would give the animal in these controlled experiments, and they try to train them to fit what you see, so either neural data or this kind of observations. And of course, most of these recurrent neural networks, the more expressive they are, the more black box they are. But one way to do it is to try to look at some of these dynamical motifs of these RNNs. So you can look at, there are some approaches for RNNs where you can actually look at fixed points or limit cycles and bifurcations, etc. And you can say something about the kind of computation that the brain is doing. So you can relate fixed points to memories or some limit cycles to a repetitive behavior, and so, or bifurcation to moving from one task to the other. So this is getting a bit closer, or at least people have shown some success for these kind of simple controlled experiments. Let's see. I think this decided to stop working now. Okay, so this doesn't work anymore. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So the problem is that these simple kind of description, these fixed points and limit cycle are probably just a function of these simple tasks. So people find these if you have a simple task, but if you go to more complex naturalistic behavior, then probably these are not enough to explain. Neural dynamics, which is quite a rough terrain. So we have a lot of, it's a nonlinear dynamical system. You have, it evolves across different temporal and spatial scales. You have partial observability, you're only observing a couple of neurons or a proxy of these recordings, while you do have billions of neurons, and you typically don't have enough data. And even if you have this data, it's quite noisy. So a different approach is that we're looking into is to try to compare different models instead, and we treat this as trying to do generative modeling. So we assume that the data that we have are collected from some or are sampled from some distribution, and we're trying to learn a similar distribution using our models rather than doing regression, and rather than starting from something like deep neural networks and then trying to explain that, try to go the other way around, which is starting from well-understood models and then augment them if needed, if you need more complex networks, for example, to model your observations. So going towards hybrid models and mostly this SciML kind of models. And the last thing, we treat these models as SDEs because, as I said, it is quite complex dynamics. We're only observing a subset of the observations. And what we want to say is, if you view these kind of models as differential equations, you can view them as a spectrum from white box to black box models, where on one spectrum you have these kind of traditional differential equations where you know these kind of parameters and what each parameter mean. And on the other end, if you have a model that only have neural networks, you have neural differential equation, and you have this entire spectrum between them that you can fill. So this is the kind of models we're working on. We have some inputs, we have some outputs, and we have a hidden dynamical system that we try to infer. And what we're saying is we want to conceptualize these hidden dynamical systems as SDEs with some differentiable drift and diffusion terms. And these terms could come either from traditional models, or you could use also function approximators for them. But of course, the main question is, or the main challenge is, if you have something like this, like an SDE that has potentially some neural networks in them, is how can you infer these parameters in an efficient way? There isn't really like a standard approach or one way to do it, especially if you go into this kind of scale. So we heard about quasi-Monte Carlo approaches, or there's also adversarial approaches, but what we're trying to follow here is a method that is trying to do variational inference or amortized variational inference for these kind of SDs. I'm not going to go much into the details, but if you're interested, the method is in the package, and I can refer you to these papers. So we tested these. I think the conclusion also, this is some of the examples that we have in the notebook. So the conclusion is we try to test this on different data sets, and what we actually see is these kind of SDE models always work better than if you have ODEs, and even with much smaller models. So you end up with smaller latent states needed to fit the data than if you have an ODE, for example. We're also looking at different domains where you have these kind of problems, trying to fit SDEs to empirical data, try this into stochastic cloud Volterra models, and also some PKPD models as well. If you're interested, the package is now online, still in development mode, but at least for now, if you want to try it, there's a page online, and there's a documentation, and you can also read the paper if you're interested to know more. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you. We have time for a couple questions. Yep.
Could you elaborate a bit more about the universal differential equations, like how couples with the neural systems?
So in the end, I think that's maybe which was the best slide to show this. So in the end, you have a dynamical system that you want to express, and you usually write these models as ODEs or SDEs. In our case, we think of them as SDEs, and this is more or less the way you can interpret universal differential equation if you have neural networks in them, because neural networks are universal approximators. Then there is this term that people have put on it, is that these are universal differential equations. And what I'm trying to say here is if you use this. Yeah. 1 second. If you think about differential equations in general, you can think of this universal differential equation as a spectrum between a traditional differential equation that doesn't have any kind of neural networks, and on the other end is just neural networks there, and that's what's called neural differential equation, which is people have been using mostly in the machine learning literature. And there's all this space in between these kind of extremes that you can exploit if you have some knowledge about the system, that you can use or mix and match and stuff like this and test models in that way.
Thank you. All right.
There's one more? Or?
One more question. Sorry, we're a bit running out of time, but we can continue during the break.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.